fiction, in particular Gothic fiction. The Small Museum and the Surgeon's House are both out at the moment. They are particularly dark and grim examples of the Gothic fiction genre. I do really enjoy writing very dark fiction, and I do enjoy the research that goes with those. So both of those books centre on asylums and Victorian medicine, and really they explore humans as monsters and the sort of dark desires that exist within people, and the lengths that people will go to make sure that their desires are fulfilled, or that they win, if you like. So that kind of psychological fiction is very interesting to me, and it always has been. So I really like Victorian novels. I like the novels of and the short stories of people like Sheridan Le Fanu, and I really love the idea of people sitting around and trying to scare the pants off of each other in these sort of Victorian ghost story circles that they used to have. I'd really like to bring that back, actually, and I have suggested it several times, but for some reason my friends say no. Anyway, that kind of storytelling was incredibly important to the Victorians, and they were really interested in ghosts and whether or not there was an afterlife, because they had a vested interest in trying to prove that there was an afterlife, so they could prove that there were souls, so they could cling on to their thoughts and societal thoughts about religion. I think these days we like to feel more comfortable in there being more scientific explanations for ghosts and for sort of paranormal experiences, but I don't think we always have all of the answers. We don't like it when we don't understand things, and I think sometimes as humans we have to just accept that there are things that happen that we don't understand. I'm going to tell you a story now as part of this series about a paranormal encounter which happened to me. It isn't the first time I've had a paranormal encounter. I used to have a flat that I rented in Pimlico. It was the top floor of one of those large white townhouses in Pimlico, and it was brilliant. And I think the flat that I had probably was in the servants' quarter, right at the top of the house. And for a long time, I used to wake up reasonably regularly when I was asleep with this sensation that there was something sitting on my chest. And I never really spoke to anybody about it until somebody else who came into the flat had exactly the same experience, and we talked about it. And then another friend of ours had said they'd had the same experience as well. And I think what we thought was that maybe it was a cat or some kind of animal, but I suspect more likely, given that the Georgians and the Victorians had a lot of children as servants, it was probably a small child. But the presence of that particular ghost was always quite benign. I never really worried about sharing my house with that ghost. It was not too intrusive. Obviously it woke me up reasonably often, but it was maybe it was a cat after all, because they are quite fond of doing that. Anyway, that was not the worst paranormal experience that has happened to me. The one that I want to tell you about today was really quite dark and really quite disturbing. So it began when my husband and I were house hunting in Cranley in Surrey, where we live. And we were looking for a house, and we looked for a house on Mead Road. We went to this particular one, and as soon as I got inside the house, I knew that something wasn't right. I could feel all the hairs, and it sounds like a massive cliche, but I could genuinely feel all the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And as we moved through this house, the sensation began to get much worse. And my husband, who's quite a practical man, was really laughing at me and saying, this house has just been very badly extended. I think what you're not liking is the fact that it feels uncomfortable because it's not very well designed and not very well planned. And the more that we moved through, he could see that it was affecting me quite badly because I was getting more and more quiet, which is quite unusual for me. Anyway, we went into the kitchen, and at this point, I was really beginning to feel very bad, and this sudden sensation of nausea came up. I had to rush outside into the garden, And I just said, I can't go back in there. Absolutely nothing would have made me go back in there. There was something so malevolent that I could feel, that it really affected me for quite some time. And we didn't really speak about it to anybody. We did end up buying the house that we live in now, which is also Edwardian, on the same road. And sometime later, after we'd moved into this house, so it's probably at least a year since I had that particular encounter, we had some neighbours over for drinks at Christmas, and we began to tell stories, ghost stories, like Victorian stories. And they all said, you do know the story about the thing that happened on this road? And I said, no, I hadn't heard of it. So it transpired that during the 1960s, there was a really horrible incident in that house where a young family who had a baby. The baby was about 6 months old, and they didn't know people in the area, so they'd contacted an organisation to get a babysitter. And the organisation that they ended up getting a babysitter from was a group that worked with disturbed and rehabilitated people who had been released from psychiatric care settings. But they didn't tell the family this, and they sent a young lady round, and the young lady wasn't rehabilitated properly. And when the baby started crying, she ended up shutting the baby into the freezer. And when I heard this, all of those kind of sensations kind of came back, and I thought, that is such a horrible thing to happen. Just like an unprecedentedly horrific thing to have happened, that actually no wonder that house still bears all of the marks of that. I don't know whether anybody watching this has had their own paranormal experiences. I'd really love to hear them, because I do think that when something really devastating and emotionally strong and it's unpleasantly evil as that happens, there has to be some kind of a scientific explanation for the strength of feeling and the strength of emotion that resides then in that house. There has to be something to do with matter. I don't know. I know that a lot of people have tried to do that kind of research. Anyway, I was quite taken aback by this, but it did kind of make sense to me after that, and it was just the most profound experience. It's not the first time I've had feelings like that in a property. I've had a similar feeling when going into Dunster Castle, in the dungeons there, in the kind of oubliette that's there. But I think that's, I don't know, I think it's a bit more rational because it's a really ancient building, would carry more kind of but this being just an ordinary looking house from the outside is something that you just would never know. But then the neighbours carried on, and they kept talking to us about other things. They said, oh, you do know about the other murder which happened on this street? No one is ever going to come to Cranley again after watching this video. And we said, no, we hadn't heard about this. And apparently in the house, which is almost diagonally opposite us, there was a man who killed his wife in the 1970s, apparently. In some sort of domestic argument, and ended up. He was a pilot. He was a regular airline pilot, but also had his own sort of mini plane. It's a microlight. There's a field for them not too far away from here, and so he bundled up this body in a carpet and took it to dump elsewhere. Although he got found out pretty quickly. So there we are. Those are my paranormal experiences, and I haven't written about them in books yet, but maybe one day I will. Anyway, I'd love to hear more about yours.